Emma Carter had 5 minutes left to live. The noose scratched at her neck as she stood on the wooden gallows under the merciless midday sun. Splinters bit into her bare feet on the trap door, and her heart thundered in her chest. Below, a crowd of townsfolk watched with grim, conflicted faces, some unable to meet her eyes. Sheriff Randall Briggs, cruel eyes glinting beneath the brim of his hat, gripped the lever that would seal her fate. In that unbearable moment, every tick of the clock felt like a hammer driving nails into her coffin. "Any last words, girl?" Briggs sneered, his voice cutting through the hot, still air. Emma's throat was dry, but she lifted her chin. She would not give him the satisfaction of begging. With a shaky breath, she forced her voice to steady. "I am innocent, and God knows it." A few onlookers glanced at each other, uncertainty flickering in their eyes, but no one dared challenge the sheriff. The wind picked up, and the noose swayed gently beside Emma's cheek. Time was running out, and hope seemed as distant as the blue mountains on the horizon. Sheriff Briggs spat in the dust and moved his hand to the release. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, whispering a final prayer. Her mind felt oddly calm in the face of death, picturing the rolling prairie where she'd grown up and the mother she'd lost so young. If this was the end, she vowed to meet it with dignity. The crowd held its breath as Briggs's fingers tightened on the lever. Suddenly, a deep voice rang out over the square. "Hold on!" Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Emma's eyes flew open. A tall stranger stepped forward from the edge of the throng, dust clinging to his long coat. His face was shadowed by a battered hat, but as he looked up, a jagged scar caught the light on his tanned cheek. He was the very picture of a grizzled ranger. The stranger rested a weathered hand on the revolver at his hip. "This hanging ain't happening," he declared, voice calm but edged with steel. "Because that woman there is my bride." The world seemed to stop. A stunned hush fell over Copper Creek's main street. Emma's heart skittered. Was this a miracle or a final cruel trick of fate? Sheriff Briggs froze, eyes narrowing at the scarred stranger. Murmurs rose among the townsfolk. No one had expected a savior in the final moments, least of all one claiming that. High on the gallows, the rope still bit into her skin, but Emma felt a spark of hope flicker to life. 2 days earlier, Emma had arrived in Copper Creek looking for a fresh start. That very evening, she made a dangerous enemy. Sheriff Briggs lost his temper in the saloon, beating an old prospector over a trivial matter, and Emma boldly intervened. Publicly humiliated by her defiance, the corrupt lawman fixed her with a vengeful glare. "You'll pay for this," he hissed. Emma's act of courage earned quiet admiration from a few patrons, but most looked away in dread. They knew Briggs would not forgive being shamed by a slip of a girl. At dawn the next day, Briggs struck. He and his deputies dragged Emma from her bed and threw her in jail, accusing her of a crime she didn't commit. Attempted arson, he claimed falsely, holding up planted evidence of a fire that never was. In truth, Emma's only offense was standing up to him. The town awoke to the sight of the frightened but unbowed young woman behind bars. No one dared oppose the sheriff as he vowed she would hang at sunrise for her supposed misdeeds. Fear and helpless anger gripped Copper Creek. They had seen this kind of cruel justice before. Unbeknownst to Emma, someone new in town had been watching. Jack Boone, a former Texas Ranger with a scar across his cheek and a deeper wound in his past, arrived in Copper Creek that morning. He witnessed the sheriff's sham accusations and heard whispers of Emma's bravery. Jack had seen too many innocents crushed by injustice. It was the kind of tragedy that left him scarred and wandering. He wasn't about to let it happen again. Late that night, Jack crept to the small jailhouse window. In a low whisper, he told Emma he believed she was innocent and promised to save her. Through the iron bars, she could only see his earnest eyes in the darkness. But it was enough. Desperate and alone, Emma trusted the stranger's word. "I won't let you hang. I swear it," he vowed softly. He asked her to keep faith come morning, no matter what he said or did. Emma nodded, hope kindling in her chest as Jack vanished into the shadows. Morning broke on Emma's final day. Sheriff Briggs marched her to the gallows in the pale light, eager to finish his revenge. Her hands were tied and the noose was looped around her neck. The townsfolk gathered quietly, their faces drawn with shame and sorrow. Emma's heart pounded, but she stood tall, scanning the crowd for any sign of the mysterious stranger who had promised to help. Briggs cleared his throat and read out Emma's alleged crimes and the sentence of death. His voice brimmed with false authority and personal vengeance. Emma closed her eyes, a silent prayer on her lips, as he reached for the lever to send her to her fate. Hold on. The shout shattered the silence at the last instant. Jack Boone stepped out into the open, commanding every eye. Dust swirled around his boots as he squared his shoulders. This hanging ain't happening, because that woman is my bride, he proclaimed, loud enough for all to hear. A ripple of shock moved through the onlookers. Emma's eyes flew open in astonishment. Bride. Up on the scaffold, Sheriff Briggs's face twisted from surprise to livid rage. "What did you say?" he snarled. Jack met his glare without flinching. "Emma Carter is my wife," he lied bravely. "By law, you can't hang her without a proper trial." The townspeople began to murmur. Briggs had bypassed any trial, and they all knew it. "She's not your wife, and this is none of your business." Briggs spat, jerking his pistol from its holster. But Jack was faster. In a flash, his revolver was in hand. Boom! One shot cracked the morning air. The bullet sliced through the rope above Emma's head, severing it in a spray of hemp fibers. The noose fell loose from her neck. Gasps erupted as everyone registered what had happened. Briggs roared in fury and lunged up the steps. He seized Emma, wrenching her in front of him as a human shield. A gleaming knife appeared in his fist and pressed to Emma's throat. "Anybody moves, and she dies," the sheriff shouted, eyes wild. A tense standoff gripped the street. Jack kept both pistols trained on the sheriff, his voice low and lethal. "Let her go." Around them, the crowd stirred. For the first time, the townsfolk saw their feared sheriff for what he was, an outlaw in a badge. Anger began to replace their fear. "Drop the knife, Briggs," someone yelled from the gathering. Others nodded, emboldened by the ranger's courage. Briggs could feel his control slipping away. The sheriff's bravado faltered as he faced 100 angry witnesses. Still, he snarled and pressed the blade harder against Emma's skin, drawing a thin bead of blood. Emma winced, her pulse pounding in her ears. Remembering Jack's midnight promise, she mustered every ounce of her courage. In one swift motion, she drove her elbow back into Briggs's ribs with all her might. The sheriff grunted in pain and stumbled, his knife hand jerking aside for an instant. Jack seized the chance. 2 gunshots rang out in rapid succession. Briggs cried out and collapsed to the ground, the knife flying from his grasp. A crimson stain spread on his shoulder. Jack's bullet had struck true without ending the sheriff's life. Freed from Briggs's clutches, Emma stumbled forward. Jack was there in a heartbeat, catching her as she fell into his arms. He held her upright, his arm steady and strong around her trembling frame. For a moment, the whole town stood in stunned silence. Then, one of Briggs's deputies bolted for a horse, trying to flee. "Oh, no, you don't," hollered the blacksmith, intercepting the man with a powerful tackle. The other deputy dropped his gun and threw up his hands, the fight gone out of him. A cheer began to rise as the people of Copper Creek realized the nightmare was over. Emma clung to Jack, tears of relief brimming in her eyes. Jack gently loosed the cut rope from her shoulders and tossed it aside. "You came," she whispered, voice raw with gratitude and wonder. Jack tipped his forehead to hers briefly, a rare tenderness in his eyes. "I gave you my word, didn't I?" he murmured. Briggs, wounded and defeated, tried to scoot away in the dirt, but a dozen angry townsfolk closed in. Old Hank limped forward, his voice shaking with triumph. "Your days of terrorizing us are over, Sheriff." The townspeople tied Briggs's hands tight with the very rope that had been around Emma's neck. For once, the tyrant had no power left. He could only curse as they hauled him off. He would face real justice now. In the aftermath, many in the crowd approached Emma with heads hung and apologies tumbling out. Martha, the saloon owner, wrapped a blanket around Emma's shoulders and hugged her hard. "I'm so sorry, honey," she said, crying. "We should have spoken up for you." Others echoed her sentiment, eyes downcast. Exhausted and overwhelmed, Emma managed a forgiving smile. "Thank you, all of you," she replied softly. She knew fear had kept them silent, but their hearts were good. Soon after, Sheriff Briggs was locked in his own jail cell, awaiting transport to stand trial in the territorial court. Copper Creek felt like a town reborn. The sun seemed to shine brighter. The air felt easier to breathe. In the days that followed, the people of Copper Creek worked to set things right. They offered Emma a home, a job, and the friendship she had never truly been given before. She accepted their kindness with an open heart, finally feeling she had a place among them. The town council even asked Jack to stay on as the new lawman, to help keep order with fairness this time. After years of drifting, Jack Boone found himself nodding yes. He had found a town and a woman worth settling down for. Through it all, Jack and Emma were rarely apart. Bound by the ordeal they survived together, they discovered that their friendship had blossomed into deep love. In quiet moments on the boarding house porch, they talked for hours under the stars. Jack spoke of the family he lost long ago to lawless violence, and how he'd nearly given up on people until Copper Creek gave him a reason to hope again. Emma shared her own past sorrows and the simple dream she carried of a home and family. By the time her bruises faded, their hearts were fully entwined. A week later, the townsfolk gathered under a brilliant blue sky to celebrate a wedding no one had seen coming. In front of the little church adorned with wildflowers, Jack Boone and Emma Carter stood side by side, beaming with joy. With tears of happiness, Emma promised to stand by Jack's side for all her days. Jack's voice was thick with emotion as he vowed to protect and cherish her always. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, a cheer went up that echoed against the distant hills. This time, when Jack proudly called her his bride, it was true in every sense. He lifted her veil, and they shared a tender, heartfelt kiss as the crowd applauded. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold and purple, the newlyweds walked down Main Street together. Every door and window was open to greet them, and every face they passed wore a grateful smile. Copper Creek would never forget how close it came to a terrible injustice, nor how a scarred ranger and a courageous young woman set things right. The tale of Emma's rescue and the ranger's bravery spread far and wide, growing into legend across the frontier. Folks would say that on a fateful morning in Copper Creek, fear put a noose around an innocent woman's neck, but love and justice cut her free in the nick of time. Jack and Emma often paused on that same rise at the edge of town where they first looked out together, remembering how far they'd come. Under the vast western sky, they had found exactly what they both had been searching for: a place to belong, a purpose, and a love strong enough to heal old wounds. If you enjoyed this Wild West love story, saddle up for the next adventure. There are many more untold tales of love and justice waiting to be discovered under these endless frontier skies.